But I'm
Well, Tim
serious.
keeps coming over.
Seriously.
We're gonna fall right into that category.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for Ash Bishop's debut novel, Intergalactic Exterminators. As some of you who are already here for him know, he is an avid reader, a big nerd. And we are just so lucky to have him here, especially with such a long list of other professions, from teacher to being in the video game industry to even grabbing coffee once for Quentin Tarantino. And now he's here with his own book. So everyone, without further ado, and thank you everyone for joining us also online, I would like to welcome Ash Bishop.
Well, that feels strange. Hey guys, thank you for making it out here.
And you can take your mask off if you want.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I did once fetch coffee for Quentin Tarantino. Worked at his house on Mulholland Drive. He had an editing suite in his house, and I was a production assistant for his production company, Abandoned Park Productions, when it was part of Miramax, when there was Miramax. And I got an internship with him and got him coffee and chatted with him and learned a little bit about being an artist. I guess you just have to be a madman. That's the main thing I picked up from Quentin, and have a really good memory. To tell you a little bit about myself, I got here in San Diego in 1997. I attended San Diego State for their creative writing program. I went there beforehand to try and introduce myself to the teachers because it was a very competitive program. And it was fun enough, and I learned this firsthand, that kids weren't graduating. They were just staying forever, basically. And so they were only taking 3 poets and 3 writers each year into the program. So I had to be basically one of 3 or learn to write poems. And as a way of kind of getting an advantage for myself, I went and introduced myself to all of the teachers. And I remember Dr. Matlin, one of the teachers, he looked at me, and I was probably, I'd say 22 or 23 at the time. And he said, "Here's what I want you to do." He said, "Go get a job working at Home Depot for 5 years and then apply here." And I was like, the prerequisite for your program is 5 years at Home Depot? Now, in hindsight, I understand what he was saying. He was telling me, you need life experience, you need to run the emotional gambit of the world in order to really be a writer. And while that's not saying young people can't be writers, they're some of the best, it is saying that as I got older, I started to understand more about how characters were created, how they blended together, how they interacted. And this book, you could say, is 2.5 decades in the making, because I came down here, as I said, in '97. Homes in Claremont were $75,000, and a lot of stuff has changed since then. One thing that didn't change was my love and my desire for writing, and I, in fact, this is the, I guess you would say, 5th book I've written in its entirety. Although this one I revised 3 different times, so I don't know if that counts or not. But what I did find, the very first book I wrote was about a baby. I'm sorry, let me say that again. It's about a guy that is working on Wall Street. He's got all these sort of trappings of wealth and power, and he gets murdered, and he's reborn in the stomach of a woman, who he doesn't know. He sort of is reincarnated with all of his memories intact, but he doesn't know who murdered him. So he has to sort of be born and then grow up a little bit and then solve his murder as a toddler. It's a ridiculous concept, and you can see pretty easily why it took me so many years to get published. I refused to, I guess, go to the mainstream right off the bat. In fact, what I did find was a lot of the responses to my early novels were We really love this, but we can't really see where it fits on shelves. And even my reviews for this one are coming back with, this is the weirdest book we've ever read. So I never really figured out how to write a mainstream novel, but I got good enough, I guess, to attract attention of some quality folks. Hey guys. Interestingly enough, I actually had quit writing, I want to say in 2006. I didn't quit, but I'd stopped because a couple of babies were born and they were taking so much of my time. And fortunately, a couple of students of mine, when I was teaching, inspired me to write again and get going again on a project. So that was actually what started my second book. The second book was a murder mystery. It didn't go anywhere. Interestingly, it begins with the main character saving a cat. And this was right before the sort of save the cat phenomenon became really popular in creative writing. So anyway, that one didn't go anywhere. I wrote a third mystery, managed to get an agent for that. She was out of Florida. She didn't have any sales. I didn't care. I just wanted an agent of any kind to call my own. And she didn't sell my book. And I decided, you know what? Enough of these mysteries. Let's write something mainstream. And so I wrote a young adult science fiction novel, because at the time, Hunger Games and Twilight was just finishing. Hunger Games was becoming really popular. Divergent was starting to take off. And we all saw that this is where the market was going. And I was tired of writing unique things that only I got to experience. And so I decided to try something a little bit more mainstream. And not a surprise, I landed a really top flight agent. Unfortunately, what I also learned is if you take the mainstream, sometimes the market gets saturated. And that's what happened. She couldn't sell my young adult novel. And she said, the next hot market is adult science fiction. She was predicting. She turned out to be right. She called me a couple weeks ago and said, do you have anything else? Because people keep contacting me asking about adult sci-fi. And I was like, nope. I've got 3 mysteries. It turned out she was right, and she was more than right, because here we are with the end product. So it's weird. It's a little unusual. It took me a long time to get to this point. A lot of people helped me. A lot of friends came through. A lot of friends are here today, and I really appreciate that. So I thought I'd read the first chapter, and there's kind of a reason for this. I just listened to the audiobook for the first time, and the reader is really serious. In fact, when I listened to him, I thought to myself, I should have written that differently, because he's really hitting so many of these sort of dramatic moments hard with his voice. And I love it. It's really fun to have my art interpreted by someone else's artistic ability. But what I also realized is I might in the text, I might not be communicating the playfulness of the tone, what I really intended when I wrote it. This is supposed to be fun, 100% fun. And it's not very often that science fiction is just pure fun. It usually has other layers of seriousness and predictions and foreboding and this kind of thing. But I thought, as I looked out at all of you with your masks on, that we probably had enough of that, at least for a little while. And so I decided to make it fun. So I'm going to read you chapter 1 in the tone that I at least pictured it in my head. After that, I'll take questions. All right. Russ woke up lying flat on the ground, his mind foggy as hell. He could smell blood. When he reached forward as gingerly as possible, his muscles screamed at the movement. He was on his back. The forest trees waved down at him, blocking out the faint moonlight. He took a couple of deep breaths and reached forward again, groping around in the darkness. His hand came back, slick with blood and fur and leaves. And then he heard voices. Do you want to do this then? I just wouldn't call this tracking is all. The blood trail's 3 feet across. A tiny baby could follow this trail. Show me that baby. Shh, both of you quiet. Something's registering on the heat index. The confusion and pain made it hard to think. Are these locals, he thought? He fumbled into his pocket, looking for his flashlight, but also testing for further damage. His hand found the light. It illuminated the small clearing. The deer's corpse was just a few feet away, right where he'd shot it, but it wasn't whole. Something had torn off its back legs, shearing straight through the muscle and bone. Russ took a deep breath, but he didn't let his body or mind react to the sight of the carnage. Seconds later, the stranger's flashlights found him. He's over here, to our left. Russ heard 3 or 4 people hurrying through the brush. A woman in all black stepped into the clearing. Her brown hair was tied back in a bun, and she had a long steel shotgun in her hands. An odd earring twinkled in her ear. "You okay, son?" she asked. Crouching down, she placed her hand on his chest. She stared into his eyes, examining him. "Looks like you're going into shock. Just stay on your back and concentrate on breathing." A man followed shortly after her. He glanced around, holding up a funny-looking flashlight to cast out the darkness. "He's alone," the man confirmed. "Are you from around here?" he asked Russ. "I'm from California," Russ groaned. "I don't know what that means," the man said. "Just hold still," the woman said. She pulled a gadget from her pack. The end telescoped out like an antenna. Russ watched as an aqua blue light shone down from the device, running across his entire body. He flinched as it reached his face, and even a small movement caused his lungs to burst in pain. "He's got 4 broken ribs, a hairline fracture in the left wrist, and a torn hamstring. Did you see what hit you?" the woman asked him. Russ tried to think. "No?" The word was as much a groan as anything else. "Tell us what you remember." Russ rolled over onto his side. It hurt badly. Now that she'd pointed out the injuries, everything was localized. His ribs throbbed, his wrist felt hollow, his left leg was pierced with pain. "I was driving down Route 89 and a deer," Russ pointed to the half-deer corpse beside him. "This deer dashed in front of my car. I knew I'd injured it by the sound it made when it hit the bumper, but I didn't think I'd have to chase it this far into the woods to put it out of its misery." Russ took a minute to swallow. "After I shot it, I was kneeling, jacking out the leftover rifle shells, but then I was flipping through the air. I think I hit the tree right behind me." The woman looked back at the tree. It's pretty splintered up. "I was flying upside down and backwards." "Can you walk?" the man asked. 2 more women, dressed in the same black combat gear, entered the clearing. They both had long rifles slung over their backs. Russ glanced at the newcomers, his eyes lingering on the guns. "They weren't locals, you can tell that much. Who are you guys?" "Just local hunters," one of the newcomers said. "Sure," Russ said. "Tell me what hit you," the first woman said firmly. "I don't know, a meteor, a buffalo, maybe a rig?" The woman pulled a roll of pills from a molly strap on her backpack. "Swallow 2 of these, they're going to kill the pain." Russ chewed the pills. Their chalky taste filled his mouth and crept up his nose. "They won't cure any of the damage. You're going to feel fine, but you're not fine. Move carefully until you can get proper medical treatment. The road is 2 miles north. Can you reach it without help?" Russ nodded. Whatever she gave him was blazing through his bloodstream, kicking the fog and ache off every organ that it passed. What did I just eat? 2 miles north, don't stop for any reason. One of the newcomers, a well-muscled young woman with close-cropped brown hair, glanced at the half-deer corpse lying next to Russ. Its blood had sprayed a pattern across the splintered tree. "Look at the animal, Kendron," she said. The guy, Kendron, shone his flashlight over the deer corpse. "Whoa," he said. "We definitely found what we're looking for." "You really chummed the water with this stag," the short-haired woman told Russ. "Kendron, Starlin, mouth shut," the first woman said, making a slashing gesture. She pulled Russ to his feet. He gritted his teeth against the pain, but it was gone. Kendron and Starlin stayed huddled around the deer, crouched low, inspecting where the hindquarters had been sheared off the bone. Kendron looked at the deer's head and saw where Russ had shot it. "You make this shot?" he asked Russ. "In the dark?" "Yeah." "Was the deer dead already? Were you a foot away, point blank?" "No, it was up on the ledge over by the river, 40 feet in that direction." Russ pointed up the gradual incline. Kendron was still looking at the dead deer. "You shot it between the eyes from 40 feet, in the dark." "Yeah, I guess." "Head on back to the highway," the woman said firmly. "You should start now. It might be dangerous to stay here." The way she was looking at him, Russ kind of figured she meant that she was what was dangerous, if he didn't do what she said. "I just need to find my grandpa's rifle first," Russ told her. She grabbed him by the arm. Her grip was incredibly strong. In the light from her flashlight, her eyes seemed almost purple. "Start walking toward..." Before she could finish her sentence, the third woman, who'd melted into the darkness, stepped forward again. "Cut the light," she hissed. "It's here." Something came crashing through the brush, making a howling sound. It wasn't a sound Russ had ever heard before. It was a deep, rumbling growl, followed by a pitched screech that made the hair on his arms stand up. Branches were snapping, and he could hear claws scraping on rock. It was still 30 feet south, but it scared the hell out of him. El Toreador, you're up, the woman hissed. The girl they called El Toreador had been on lookout. She was far enough into the darkness that Russ could barely see her, just a wisp of thick brown hair bobbing in the darkness. That is until she pounded on her chest with her fist. The vest lit up red, casting shadows across the trees. My real name's Atara, she told Russ quickly, then, don't look so worried. We're professionals. Starlin, hit her with the hormone. The vest is enough, Atara growled. Starlin slipped back into the light. She was carrying some kind of tube. It looked like a pool toy. She pushed hard against the end, blasting thick goo all over the other woman. Hurry up, it's almost here. Russ was scrambling around in the bush, looking everywhere for his rifle, when the creature burst through the perimeter glow of his tiny flashlight. Atara's vest reflected off its face, bathing it in red light. It was all fangs and claws, huge, twice the size of a grizzly bear and full of rippling muscles stretched out in terrifying feline grace. It leapt at Atara, but mid-flight it caught the scent of the goo and reoriented to the left, bumping her off her feet, but not harming her. The huge cat thing landed softly, immediately turning toward the fallen woman, sniffing the air, growling and bobbing its head. Got the scent. The big kitty's feeling amorous, Kindred yelled. He, Starlin, and the other woman all had their rifles raised. They were tracking the cat, ready to fire. Atara looked pissed, sprawled on the ground with her legs sprayed. Knock it down. We're authorized for lethal. What are you waiting for? She shouted. The creature was fully in the light now. It looked a lot like a tiger, but it was at least 6 times the size, with wavy, shaggy hair. What the hell is it? Russ shouted. The feline was practically straddling Atara. I don't like how it's looking at me. Come on, shoot, she demanded. The creature batted a paw, claws extended, and tore the glowing vest off her chest. It drew the vest up to its nose, sniffed, and started to growl again. Then the huge beast paused, slowly turning away from Atara. It sniffed the air, its shoulders hunched, fur on the scruff of its neck rising. As it turned, its deep onyx eyes looked squarely at Russ. It growled and took a step toward him. Russ thought his heart had been beating hard before, but as the huge cat glided toward him, the thudding in his chest was so loud it drowned out every other sound. He didn't even hear the discharge of Starlin's shotgun 2 feet away from the monster. The wad of pellets sprayed against the creature's flank, and it howled, tearing away into the darkness so fast Russ didn't even see it move. Atara scrambled to her feet and dropped her rifle. Did you see that? A direct hit and no penetration. I told you this Earth tech was garbage. What is this, the 13th century? I'm powering up. The first woman, the one with the purple eyes, glanced at Russ. She was short, wiry, with the powerful shoulders of a linebacker. Russ realized she was the leader of whoever these people were. When are you going to learn to keep your mouth shut? She barked at Atara. You already used the CRC wand on him. 2 hours of mandatory training videos the second this is over. You'd rather be cat food than watch those again, Atara said. You skip the videos, I'll send you back through CERT training. Atara wasn't listening. She was crashing through the brush in the direction of the big cat. Nodding toward Russ, the woman shouted, Kindred, you've got containment. Then she disappeared into the darkness. Starlin drew a pistol from her belt and followed. Containment. More like babysitting, Kindred grumbled. I should be the one doing the good stuff. He glanced in the direction they'd gone. Russ kind of agreed. Kindred was huge, at least 6'5", and covered from head to toe with what Russ's cousin had always called beach muscles. He had thick, wavy hair down to his shoulder. Out in the darkness, Russ could see the others, flashlights bobbing up and down. They were headed up an incline, probably straight toward the bank of the river. Was it my imagination, or was the cat more interested in you than the vest covered in mating hormone? Kindred asked. At first, Russ didn't answer. Finally, he said, what would make it do that? No idea. It's supposed to follow the hormone. What's better than sex? Kindred shook his head, seemingly unable to answer his own question. He frowned slightly. One thing I've seen them more interested in is an open stone. Have you ever seen an open stone? They're about this big. Kindred held his hands 6 inches apart. Usually green with yellow veins running all along the edges. I don't think they're native to this area. Kindred looked around in distaste. But I've seen these cats jump planets just to get near one if it's in an unrefined state. An open stone is basically intergalactic catnip. I've never seen one, Russ told him. His voice wavered slightly, but Kindred didn't seem to notice. We better get this vest down, Kindred said. He stepped up onto the boulder and reached high into a tree, grabbing the vest from where the cat had tossed it. He folded the vest up and tucked it under his arm. I'm not even sure how to get it turned off, he said. Was that a saber-toothed tiger? You guys cloning stuff? Is this Jurassic World or something? Russ rubbed his temple. His questions were coming so fast they were jumbled in his mouth. Kindred had just said intergalactic and something about jumping planets, but Here in the dark Wyoming forest, 6 miles from his grandmother's house, he wasn't ready to face those pieces of information. Kindred threw the vest on the ground and raised his rifle, pumping a slug into it. It kept glowing. Damn, it's pretty important I get this thing turned off. Starlin's discarded rifle was just a few feet away. While Kindred kicked at the vest with his boot heel, Russ inched toward it. Touch the weapon and I'll shoot you in the face, Kindred said. He stomped on the vests again. The flashlights were way north now, probably on the other side of the river. Russ could hear the distant voices arguing about which way the big cat went. The voices were so loud, neither Kindred nor Russ heard the cat until it was right in front of them, growling, hissing, and spitting. It stalked into the circumference of the faint red light from the vest. Kindred was still standing on the vest, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Beside him, the cat was enormous, twice as tall as a man. It crouched down, looking him straight in the eye. I'm dead, he said quietly. The creature coiled back on its powerful flanks and threw itself forward like a bullet, its wicked claws stretched out, razored edges slashing at Kindred's neck and chest. Russ kicked Starlin's gun off the ground, caught it, leveled it, and fired. The bullet split the cat's eye socket, ripping through its optic nerve and straight into its brain. Momentum carried the dead body forward on its trajectory, smashing into Kindred and pinning him to the earth. A few moments later, the rest of the team returned, clambering through the thick brush. The leader approached the enormous beast and nudged it with her boot. Is it dead, Barin? Atara asked, her gun still pointed at the fallen creature. Sure is, the leader Barin responded. The wind was starting to pick up, blowing the branches of the trees, shaking off a few dead leaves. How about Kindred? Negative, Barin said. Get it off me, Kindred demanded. It's got to weigh 900 pounds. How many intergalactic laws do you think we've broken here? Atara asked. She moved next to Barin, looking down at Kindred with an expression that was half pity and half amusement. He had managed to sit up, but his legs were still wedged under the huge carcass. Including the law about referencing intergalactic law on a Tier 9 planet? Barin asked. You guys are being a little careless, Starlin said. Not our fault this thing was 100 miles off course. The MUP map promised there wouldn't be any Tier 9 bios in the vicinity. What are we supposed to do now? Atara said, nodding toward Russ. Oh, we're conscripting him, for sure, Barin said. Really? Atara asked. We're getting another human? Who? Who do you mean? Russ asked. He glanced back in the direction of the highway. His eyes were starting to adjust to the dark again, and he could make out a thick copse of trees just a dozen or so yards away. Get the huge beast off me, Kindred insisted. Barin moved to one side of the big cat and dug her powerful shoulders into it. Starlin ran over to join her, wedging one arm against the creature's flank, but putting her other arm around the waist of the woman giving orders. Tara, come on, you, new guy. We could use your help too. It's heavy as hell. Russ half ran over to them and dug his side into the creature. Its hairy skin sloshed around against the pressure, but the four of them eventually got it moving. Roll it the other way, Kindred demanded. Its penis is right next to my face. They kept rolling, and Kindred kept protesting as the great shaggy cat slowly grinded over his shoulder and face. Gravity finally caught hold of its weight, and the corpse flopped to the ground. The three in all black chuckled as Kindred spit out the taste. Oh, that's what you meant. Sorry about that, Starlin said, laughing. Kindred crawled onto his knees, still hacking and spitting. He stopped for a minute and looked at the cat's face, poking a finger in the thing's empty eye socket and wiggling it around. Another hell of a shot. The debriefing wasn't just wrong about location, Atara said. This creature's fur was like steel mesh. Our bullets weren't doing anything. Kindred rolled up onto his knees, both hands propped on his thighs. You saved my life, he told Russ. No problem, Russ said. It was the last thing Russ said, before he dropped the rifle and sprinted full speed back toward the safety of the trees. He was running as fast as he could, pumping his arms, banging his shins on rocks, bumping past pines, carelessly plunging through the dark. He'd gotten about 20 yards running full speed when something metal slapped around his ankle. It tipped him off balance, and for the second time that night, he could feel himself careening head over heels. He hit a tree again, and then slowly slipped out of consciousness.
Oh.
You're too kind. So yeah, kind of silly. Guy wakes up in the forest next to half a deer, and shenanigans ensue. I think this is now the time for questions, if anyone has any. Yes, Dave.
How did you get started on this story? What was the moment, the thing, a picture of a deer that was cut in half? No.
Sure. So when I wrote this, believe it or not, editor, the publishing editor, came back and said, "Could we start it somewhere other than him awake in the forest? Because that's kind of a cliche." And I was like, "Nah, I like it how it is." But she was totally right. I was actually driving on. Where was I headed? Upward toward Northern California, I think. And I was playing Wayward Pines, the audiobook. And in that book, it begins with the character waking up in the middle of a forest. And my imagination is kind of like this. It immediately took that concept and just started going in this direction. And so my character was doing this. I don't know what the Wayward Pines character was doing. I never finished the audiobook. He was dealing with aliens, I think, or something. No, demons? I don't remember. It became a TV show, but I never finished the story. My imagination just took the idea and just veered right with it. And that was kind of where the story came from. I knew that I wanted to write a story about monster hunters, and I was kind of thinking that it would be fun to write something episodic, something that existed where there was kind of a different monster for each section. But my agent told me that episodic stories don't really sell. There's not a huge market for them. And so I wove the individual monster hunting into a larger narrative, where he's basically abducted, taken away by this team, and not forced exactly, but hired into a dangerous job to hunt creatures. The concept ultimately is scientific technology has become so advanced out in the galaxy outside of Earth that it's pretty easy to move between planets. But because sentient creatures, peaceful creatures, can move easily between planets, so can dangerous creatures sometimes. And they're enlightened enough to consider the word dangerous carefully. And the way they define it is essentially if a creature moves into a new ecosystem and starts to destroy that ecosystem, if the ecosystem simply doesn't have the resources to support it, then you have to either relocate or remove that creature. And so Russ joins a basically blue-collar gang of government workers who are tasked with removing dangerous creatures from ecosystems that can't support them. Yeah. Any other questions?
We have some
Virtual questions.
Cool.
First one up. Where did you get your inspiration for the title?
Ha! So I don't have a clever answer for that. I used to teach poetry, and I really like the way sounds work, the way that words can work together. A little tiny bit of teaching for you guys, but it's pretty common for most businesses to have repeating vowel sounds in their name. And so Amazon.com sounds cool to you if it doesn't scare you, because of the repeating O sound, right? The com and the on repeat. It's not a full rhyme, but it's a partial rhyme. It's a literary technique called consonants. So I knew I wanted to use the word intergalactic because it's a really neat word. And so I just kind of looked for other words that would sync with that sonorously, that would sound good with it. So intergalactic exterminators, we've got all these syllables, all these vowels. And if that's not enough, we add incorporated at the end. So we may have the longest syllable count of any title ever. But there's so many vowels in there that I really like how it sounds.
Did you get any pushback on the name from your editor or anyone?
It's funny, when I submitted it to my agent, I called it The Exterminators, which is just a very sort of simplistic title. And she didn't say anything, and then I changed it like quietly to Intergalactic Exterminators Incorporated, which was always going to be the name of the squad that he works for. And she didn't say anything. So I then submitted it, and it worked. Now I have a second book coming out, and I changed that title 3 times, and I never found one that I was happy with. But when I finally submitted it, I chose one, and the editors came back and said, "We love the title." And so you just never know what response you're going to get. The best instinct is to just do what you like and hope that the people with the power and the money like it.
Where's the romance?
There is romance, but I happen to come from a long line of I wrote my main character Russ in the tradition of a long line of romantic characters who only prove their love by doing things. They don't ever say it. Now, those of you who are adults know that doesn't work. That's a strategy of show your love and then go home alone. Like that's how that part ends. And so it doesn't work for him particularly. But I love this. There's a Waylon Jennings song where he falls in love with this woman, and every day he goes to her house and he chops down wood and he leaves her firewood and then he just goes home. And he does it, every day through the winter. And then in the spring, she meets somebody else and they move away. And that's the end of the story. And I think there's something really beautiful about that because there's no salesmanship, there's no pressure. He's just kind of expressing his love and hoping for the best. Now, it's also, like I said, a great way to not have romance. So there is romance if you consider acts of sacrifice to be romantic. There's not romance if you're looking for a lot of kissing and hugging, so to speak.
From the internet, what do you develop first? Characters, world, or story?
Ooh, interesting. Okay, so I get this question a lot. I really wish I could plot. The guys the writers, I shouldn't say guys, the men and women that I respect the most as writers clearly plotted everything out spectacularly in advance. There are things in the Sandman comic book and somewhat in the TV show that the seed was planted literally like 6 years before it pays off later in the comic. And I can't believe the discipline and the care that takes. I've tried to do that. I've tried to plan, but I've got like a special type of attention deficit disorder. As my wife says, it's not hyperactive disorder. It's just the calm kind where you can't pay attention to anything. I've got just enough that if I plan, and I'm running into trouble with that with the sequel to this, which I'm writing right now, if I set up a structure and a plan, I get bored. Like if I know how the chapter is going to end, it's a struggle to get there. And I think the writing falls a little bit flat as well because I'm not excited. And so I guess the best answer to that is I create the characters first. Well, let me say it this way. When my sister and I were young, there was this a game called Battling Tops that we played. And basically you release these two tops in a bowl and they struck into each other until one of them gained enough centrifugal force. Any physicists out there? One of them gained enough something to knock the other one out, right? And that's really the basics of all storytelling. That's a protagonist and antagonist in a shared space with different objectives, kind of smashing into each other until one of them loses. I tried to take my characters, set them in a shared space, get them spinning, and then let them tell the story. Now, the problem with that is it causes a lot of rewrites. It causes a lot of rewrites because you're creating content you never expected that doesn't fit your outline, you can't use ultimately. And that's part of the reason it took me 21 years to finish this book. But ultimately, I think at least it creates enough of a dynamic feel to the text that I think the prose is more alive than it would be if my particular writing style, if I planned it fully in advance and tried hard to force myself to stay on that line. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Save the Cat, which is, of course, the writing book, I guess. But are there any books on writing that you particularly like that you would recommend?
I like Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, but only because, and I'm going to spoil it. It's around here somewhere, but I'm going to make it so you don't have to buy it. The title comes from a moment in the text when her young son has left a school project, where he's got to like describe 32 birds all in one night, because he's had the assignment for 6 months, but he just didn't bother to start it until the night before. And he's crying, and his dad is like, and he's like, "How do I do this, Dad? I got to do 32 birds." And the dad says, "Bird by bird, like, get started. Put one foot in front of the other." And so I think that's probably what I would suggest. I am a video game player, and I like to play video games. And when I invest 100 hours into a video game, suddenly I've got a level 99 character who can do a lot of really neat things. But when I invest 100 hours into a book, suddenly I've got a book. And that is, in a way, a lot more gratifying and a lot more sort of functional. The video game character, you can't come out here and join us. The book I can share with all of you. So I would say that one. I just picked up a book called, I can't remember the title. It's written by Donald Moss, who's a famous literary agent. And I really hesitated to buy it because he's turned me down twice for representation. But it's been pretty good for planning my next novel. Again, planning is a struggle for me, but I'm trying to do it. I could get the title for you later. Yeah.
Another internet question. Are there any of the, well, I guess you gotta be careful on this one. Are there any of the characters based on someone you know?
Oh, all of them? Literally all of them? Excuse me.
He's got family here.
That's a tricky enough question. I spilled my water. Yeah, so my grandmother unfortunately passed away last year, I guess 2 years ago. The grandmother in this novel, it has her name and some of her vitality. The main romantic interest really loves romance novels, and those titles were easy to find because my wife leaves them littered all around the house. And so I was able to base her at least partially on my wife. Main character is not, I wouldn't say he's exactly me, but he does have trouble expressing, like I said, expressing his feelings. And he's kind of quietly heroic. I know I just described myself as heroic. The quiet part is the part that applies. He is kind of quietly doing his best without grandstanding or fanfare, without a desire for those things. And so I guess you could say those aspects of his personality are a little bit based on me. All of them have names that are borrowed from people I know. One of those two students that inspired me to keep writing is named Russ, and his name is the central character in the text. Cornelia, right here, is the other one, and she got named only a evil lawyer that appears in one chapter. So yeah, everybody's in there one way or the other.
Next online question is, how was your research for Intergalactic Exterminators, Inc.?
That's an interesting question. So since it's soft science fiction, there's not a ton of research. I mean, there are moments when I had to remind myself to have them wear masks in space because I wasn't really that preoccupied with the science. I know that's part of the genre title, but ultimately I think, I mean, there's a section over there. I think there's thousands of books that are really careful with science and exploring sort of the ways in which science and technology fuse in really interesting ways, real science and real technology fuse. And that's just not what's happening in this book. Characters, there's one character that's a giant fish, and he puts a little device called a transformer in his ear, and he appears human. There's a moment where I describe it's hard light being shaped into the appearance that he wants to appear. But that's about as far as I went with the science. Really, ultimately, for me, what matters in a story is the characters, their motivations, their personalities, them staying true to themselves. And as I said, I wanted it to be playful and fun. And that's not contrary to real heavy research, but it's hard to what am I trying to say? It's hard to really be playful if you're also worried about all the physics of space travel. I think there's one moment where a ship is described as blasting off so fast it almost leaves skid marks, which just doesn't happen in the vacuum of space, or might. I didn't do the research, so I'm not sure. I will say this also. One of the characters originally was from Nicaragua, and my agent, very seriously said to me, as a white male, if you're gonna be writing a character from a different culture, you have to, research the culture and be really careful with how it's represented, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, I think I'm going to change their background. So anyway, research a little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
Next question we have is, speaking of video games, were there any video games that inspired your book?
Oh, good question. Absolutely. So I wouldn't say it's a video game, but, well, I mean, it's not just a video game, but I'm a huge fan of the Witcher series, Andrew Sapkowski's book series. In fact, the very first one is an episodic adventure of monster hunting. And so you can see exactly where I read it and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I want him to keep doing this forever. And then immediately in the second book, he created this grand political narrative, which, became something else entirely. And I thought, well, I'd like to just have monster hunters, in this case, in this sort of fairy tale forest of the land of the Witcher. In my case, it would be space. So The Witcher definitely inspired me. I'm also a absolute fanatic for playing Magic the Gathering online and in person, and the world building that they do there is really something that I care about. Oh, I thought of one more. This is kind of a funny one. So I have a species from a planet called Nu Naru. It's GNU, how did I spell it? Nu Naru. And I needed them to
Silent T.
yeah, silent T. And I needed them to be from a place, or I needed a name for their people, and I thought Nurian. But when I wrote Nurian, I was like, man, that sounds so familiar. And I've got Nurians in the book here. It made it the final copy. I couldn't figure out where I had heard Nurian before, but I searched Nurian online with the silent G, and there was nothing. So about 6 months after the final version is with the publisher, I encouraged my daughter to play Mass Effect. And she goes, oh man, I really like the Turians. And I was like, oops. That's where I've heard it before. So yeah, I would say my inspiration comes from my subconscious, which is just a huge collection of a lot of different silly and serious things.
Last online question I have is, was there anything cut from the final draft that you wish made it in?
Ooh, that's a great question. So the way this works, I wrote this book in 2019, and I submitted it to my agent, I want to say January of 2020, and she said, I'm not kidding, she said, I like the first chapter. Which I just read to you guys. And I said, oh, cool, what else? And so anyway, I had to rewrite a lot of it. And originally he gets trained. In order for him to become an exterminator in space, he's got to get certified. There was a reference to cert training in the chapter I read. He's got to get certified. And originally it was a whole school. Where he went and he had teachers and there were all these different races and they were kind of competing, and there was this Harry Potter-esque vibe going on. And my agent read it. She said this was the first version. And she said, no, it's not adult sci-fi enough. Like the whole school setting is too playful, especially with your non-serious approach to things. And so that all got cut, and it's replaced by a training sequence, which was kind of a very manga-esque training sequence in the forest between a cert trainer and the two leads. I did love a lot of the stuff in the school. It was maybe 120 pages. So that all got cut. and there was a lot of fun things going on in those chapters. So I do miss that.
How hard was it for you to decide it's done?
Well, I
I
go
don't want
to
to go back and keep
sure.
fix it.
I go to a writer's coffee house every the first Sunday of every month here in this very store, and there's some great writers there. Guys well beyond sort of where I'm at in their career, and one of them, Scott Siegler, last Sunday said, "Perfect is the enemy of finished." And
I think it applies to a lot of things besides books.
That's right, especially art. Yeah. And he's absolutely right. And even when I read this, gosh, I wish there are things. Even as I was reading my first chapter, there are things where I'm thinking, would have liked to have done that a little different. And so it's never actually done. I don't think. You just at some point reach a moment where it's done enough that you feel confident in it and you think others are going to enjoy it. And if you read it one more time, you'll die.
So you mentioned you cut 120 pages out. That's a big chunk. Right?
Yeah.
So, and you really like that section. How did you, when you knew that had to go, kind of accept it, right? And then
Sure.
what was that process like? And what did you use to kind of do that?
Yeah, I can't really explain it except to say that I really like writing. Like I really like it. When I'm writing, it's part of that ADD. I think I'm in a different world where I am fully experiencing what's happening on the page. Like it's happening for me in my mind. And when somebody comes along and wants to tell me something like do the dishes, it's like it's such a crazy awakening. Like where am I? I'm in my house, with dirty dishes. So when your agent says, I want you to do this, you just do it because in a way it's not over yet. Like the experience isn't over. You can take another shot. You can have more fun with the characters. You can experience them again in some new way that you're still informed by the work you did. That's still something that happened to them, kind of. It still defines them, but it makes them richer, as do the new experiences, as do the new pages. So I kind of have all of it. I have everything I ever cut out, and maybe I'll do like who's the screenwriter that always like steals from himself? I don't remember. Maybe eventually I'll work it into other manuscripts and make what's that?
Stephen J. Cannell.
No, I
He does that too.
think he does formulas. Yeah, the guy that did The West Wing. I don't remember his name.
Aaron Sorkin.
Sorkin. Yeah, Sorkin will literally steal speeches and language from himself. He'll just cut it out of existing work and paste it into new work.
So we may see that 120 pages again.
Exactly. And that's the promise I tell myself. Like, well, it's leaving this text, but it may be back.
Do you have a favorite character, or is it Russ's main guy?
Russ might be my favorite. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a robot in the story that basically there's a mechanized workforce and they all work from a central server, like a cloud server. They're being told what to do and they're just doing it like ants, I guess, like drones. And he accidentally gets separated from his central server. Now, this is actually kind of a cool twist. He ends up in a bookstore called, you ready for this? The Mysterious Universe, which I originally titled The Mysterious Galaxy, and my agent, again, ever the shopkeeper, said, there is a mysterious galaxy and it's famous. I was like, I know there's a mysterious galaxy. I go to it all the time. I just wanted to give him a little homage. But anyway, we ended up changing the bookstore title to The Mysterious Universe. And he's there. He's basically a newborn baby because he's had his connection to the central server severed, and he has to learn how to be a person. Well, how does he do it? He reads books, like a lot of books. Teaches them how to be a hero, how to be a human, how to be a villain, how to be an anarchist. It teaches them everything. Yeah, they have to really work hard to keep him away from the internet. But basically, he blossoms into this, I wouldn't say fully formed character, not yet, but certainly a really interesting newborn. Yeah, so he's one of my favorites.
We got time for one last question. If anyone has a doozy.
What's your favorite monster?
Yeah, good question. So there's something called a vacuole that it only has one eye and it's tiny and it's like puffy. You can't really use it. Its eye has kind of evolved out of usefulness. So everything it does by smell. And it's got these spikes for arms. It doesn't lead a peaceful enough existence to need fingers. It just kind of stabs things to eat them. And at first, Russ is sort of lost on a planet, and he sees this creature and he thinks it's the most horrific thing he's ever seen. Now, it turns out, of course, that he's an Earthling, so his ecological rating in space is actually worse because his people are destroying their planet, and the vacuole is just sort of peacefully existing within its ecosystem and eating large bird creatures. And so I like the vacuole probably the most. One, because it's one of the more fun creatures, one of the scarier creatures, but also because it's kind of living in harmony with the rest of the creatures on its planet. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ash. Congratulations. Happy book birthday week. Everyone, if we can give him a round of applause, please. Thank you, everyone who is tuned in online. We're going to go ahead and cut the feed now and begin the in-store signing portion. You can go ahead and click a link below that says buy Intergalactic Exterminators Inc. They'll take you to our website and you can get a copy while supplies last. Bye.